Spongebob Squarepants aired May 1st, 1999, 20 years ago. Now this series is close to my and many hearts. People who grew up in the 2000s still look back on the show with fond memories of the early episodes, and even some of the later seasons have had memorable episodes. And over the years, they have had many specials and holiday episodes. So today, me and my co-host Neon Graystone will be going over most of the specials and holiday episodes.
The scale is 1 to 4, a bad rating, 5 is an average, meh, 6 is above average, good, and then 7 to 10 are above average.
Also, the Vacation and Legends of Bikini Bottom series are being rated as a whole and not individually. We do have individual scores for those episodes. Also, we are going to try and keep it as even as possible, but there are 33 specials to get through today, so that wasn't entirely possible. Scarepants was the first SpongeBob special, originally aired October 28th, 1999. This episode follows SpongeBob, who happens to be the easiest person to scare in the entire neighborhood. Certain characters go out of their way to scare SpongeBob, but they never go too far, as SpongeBob does constantly join in on the fun. He wants to enjoy the holiday, but he is too scared by everything. It's a small touch that keeps the townspeople likable for scaring SpongeBob. The atmosphere is nice, as it feels like Halloween throughout the town. The episode is funny, even though they don't have too many jokes beyond SpongeBob being scared or trying to scare people. The subtle jokes are also very funny. We have some interesting costume designs hidden in the episode, and this is during the time period where Patrick is, let's say, competently stupid. I gave this episode a 7 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode an 8 out of 10.
SpongeBob Season 1, Episode 29, the only episode named after its order. In this episode, Squidward wants to enjoy his day off, but is constantly annoyed by SpongeBob and Patrick. He decides to go hide in the Krusty Krab, and when the two search for him, he hides in the freezer. He ends up frozen for over 2,000 years. In the future, Squidward learns that
everything is chrome in the future!
Squidward then travels back in time where he invents jellyfishing, and when he starts practicing his clarinet, prehistoric SpongeBob and Patrick chase him down. Squidward flees to his time machine and accidentally breaks the switch, thus trapping them in the middle of nowhere. If you meet Carrie Shalom. Anyway, Squidward realizes he misses SpongeBob and Patrick and finds a way to return home. The episode is incredibly funny, with many quotable lines such as
everything is chrome in the future!
And
Future!
we enjoyed the Nowhere World, and Marcus and I both gave this episode a 7 out of 10.
The Valentine's Day episode revolves around SpongeBob giving everyone in town a Valentine and saving the biggest one for Patrick. His plan is to have Patrick on top of the Ferris wheel to obtain his gift of a giant chocolate heart brought to them by Sandy. Things don't go so well, as when SpongeBob is ready for Sandy, she is being held up by chocolate-eating clams, and SpongeBob panics, giving Patrick a handshake, followed by the two riding more rides with Patrick, growing more annoyed by the ride. After coming to terms with his gift, he starts talking to SpongeBob and keeps getting interrupted by various townspeople. This causes Patrick to snap and start attacking the fair before Sandy finally arrives with Patrick's gift. This episode isn't as funny as the others, but Patrick's breakdown is one of the funniest things I've seen in a while. Neon enjoyed SpongeBob's Valentine to Plankton and the fact that Patrick was okay with a handshake in the end. We both gave this episode a 6 out of 10.
This Christmas feels like the very first Christmas to me. Christmas Who, the episode that pretty much holds the title for best and most well-known SpongeBob special. This episode goes over the story of Bikini Bottom's very first Christmas. It also sports Paxy's first appearance, and the first time they changed up the SpongeBob theme song. It's nice to see almost the entire town get wrapped up in the Christmas spirit, as it gives the episode that Christmas feeling we all love to see. Squidward the Cynic himself is the only one who doesn't get in on the fun, as he doesn't believe in Santa. We get the first Christmas song, and when Santa doesn't appear, SpongeBob gives Squidward a present, causing him to have a change of heart and give away all his possessions to the town. Marcus and I love this episode as kids, and I love it now. It's a real feel-good episode that just leaves you in a good mood. There's plenty of funny jokes in the episode, with some of our favorites being Squidward pretending to play his clarinet and SpongeBob bursting into his house in the middle of the song. I gave the episode a 9.5 out of 10. Marcus gave it a 9 out of 10.
Shanghai is the first, and to our knowledge, the last episode of SpongeBob to be aired live and allow the audience to choose the ending of the episode. In this episode, the Flying Dutchman shows up and drops anchor in SpongeBob's house, and then Squidward's house. Annoyed, Squidward climbs the anchor to the Dutchman's ship, where SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward become part of the Dutchman's crew. Squidward gets out of this, but SpongeBob and Patrick join the ghostly crew. The trio then go out to scare the townspeople. Each situation they were put in have SpongeBob and Patrick fail in unique and very funny ways. After they fail for the last time, the Dutchman decides to eat them and locks them in their cabin. SpongeBob and Patrick try to escape through the perfume department and steal the Dutchman's dining sock and trade it back to the Dutchman for 3 wishes. They use the first two without thinking, and then the Dutchman decides who gets the last wish.
I have been falling for 30 minutes.
Boy, I'm glad all that's over.
This is when the live audience came into importance, as this is when we were allowed to vote on who got the last wish. While you can find the two endings that didn't get chosen pretty easily, SpongeBob was the one who was voted for. SpongeBob makes his last wish and the episode ends. This is a funny episode, and I know we have said that a lot, but SpongeBob was a very funny show back in the first few seasons. Even with the resurgence of great episodes, they still aren't as funny as back then. My personal favorite joke was when the trio tried to scare Larry at the gym. Neon's favorite joke was the ice skating joke. I gave this episode an 8 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 7 out of 10.
So SpongeBob throws a party. This episode can be broken up into 3 segments. The patchy parts, the SpongeBob controlling the party parts, and then when he tries to get back into the party. There's plenty of memorable lines in the episode, and it's well animated. The episodes in SpongeBob is setting up the party can be funny too. The only really bad part of the episode is the awkwardness of the party when SpongeBob's in control. We even get a great song at the end of the episode. Marcus and I both gave this a 7 out of 10.
Well, if this isn't a hard episode to talk about, I don't know what is. This episode is a prehistoric episode revolving around the ancestors of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. Not much happens in this episode except for the story around Patchy and Potty. Their rivalry of past versus future holds most of our humor, and we get a pretty good song out of it. Not to say that we don't get any humor in the rest of the episode, it's just that the main plot is the trio discovers fire, and that's about it. Though the jokes they tell are usually funny, I gave this episode a 6 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 7 out of 10.
I knew no good would come from you city folk and those flying machines. So this episode revolves around SpongeBob wanting to fly. We start with Patchy searching for the lost episode and get a number of jokes, some of which are funnier than others. I knew Marcus enjoyed the visual gags a lot, and the episode features 3 songs that are sung pretty well. Then again, I do love musicals, so I might be a little biased. When SpongeBob does learn to fly, the town becomes lazier and more hostile towards him. Marcus enjoyed the episode a lot more than I did and gave it an 8 out of 10, while I gave it a 6 out of 10.
So Gary runs away, and SpongeBob spends most of the episode trying to track him down. I have a soft spot for this episode. I've always been a bit of a storytelling person when it comes down to it. While I usually watch comedy, I would rather have an emotional episode than a funny one most of the time. Now, while SpongeBob and Patrick are searching for Gary, he is being taken care of by an old woman who may or may not be planning on eating him. The only jokes we really get here is from Patrick, and to his credit, I think all of them were funny. I gave this episode a 7 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 5 out of 10.
Dunces and Dragons. Marcus and I have been into D&D for over a year now, so an episode like this is a lot of fun. Our story is rather simple, as SpongeBob and Patrick are thrown back in time to the Middle Ages, and are sent on a quest with Squidward's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Squidly to slay the dragon and defeat the evil Planktonomore. This episode is a lot of fun and may just be our favorite 2D special. I know Marcus would agree when I say I want another one of these. Heck, they were talking about SpongeBob spinoffs, make this one of them. Both of us gave this episode a 10 out of 10, perfect score.
So this episode revolves around SpongeBob having a plan and nothing really working out. This episode is the first one that feels formulaic. Nothing really happens in the episode until they get to Squidward's recital. It's very nice to see SpongeBob stay optimistic, but only one of the jokes lands, and even then it wasn't very funny. I really have nothing here, guys. The song, while not the best, isn't the worst. We both gave this episode a 5 out of 10. It wasn't terrible, but it was kind of boring. So there's a few episodes that we both really wanted to talk about, and for me, this was one of them. This episode tells the story of Mr. Krabs and Plankton's childhood friendship. Like I said with Where's Gary, I'm a storytelling person, and this episode is a much better example. This episode has a few more jokes and a great story. It's cool to see where Mr. Krabs and Plankton came from. Knowing that Mr. Krabs came from poverty makes us empathize with him. It really sucks that these two friends ended their relationship over a simple argument and what I think is classified as manslaughter. I gave this episode a 9 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode an 8 out of 10.
Atlantis Squarepantus, the first hour-long episode of Spongebob Squarepants. SpongeBob and Patrick find the missing half to the Amulet of Atlantis, and most of the show's main cast, excluding Mrs. Puff and Pearl, travel to Atlantis. This episode is a Willy Wonka story, and it's also a musical. Each of the main cast has their own song that has its own style. Our personal favorite of Squidward's song is it plays with various art styles. The main story is kinda boring and devoid of comedy. We both gave this episode a 3 out of 10. I like musicals, and this was a disappointment. Pest of the West is a parody of Wild West movies. SpongeBob's ancestors travel to Deadeye Gulch and becomes the sheriff, and ends up having to save the town from Deadeye Plankton. He meets one of Patrick's ancestors, and the two become fast friends. SpongeBob saves the town, and the episode ends with a song. I actually like the song. Marcus is ambivalent towards it. We both liked the episode. Marcus liked the story, and I found the episode funny. I also liked the song, loved the designs in the episode. Marcus gave it a 7.5 out of 10. I gave it an 8 out of 10.
So this episode is kind of the opposite of the best day ever. Instead of everything ruining SpongeBob's day, SpongeBob ruins everyone else's day. SpongeBob ends up leaving town and losing his memory. His friends try to find him, and when they do, SpongeBob has ran a gang out of town and become the mayor. This episode is disjointed, right down mean-spirited. This is the first special where our main characters feel out of character. The amnesia plotline is also completely pointless. Once again, this isn't the worst episode. Me and Neon both gave this episode a 5 out of 10 after all. It's just not that great.
Guys, I got a new pair of pants. With that being said, this is the episode where SpongeBob changed his pants. He changed his pants. Pants. This episode has little to no story, but I'd be remiss if I ignored the fact that Marcus and I didn't love the way Squidward and SpongeBob bonded in this episode. I thought it was a pleasantly sweet part of the episode. Marcus gave this a 4 out of 10, I gave it a 5 out of 10. So most of the main cast go to Goo Lagoon and end up getting lost at sea. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward are trapped together and end up having to learn to surf from Johnny Depp. Mr. Krabs is stuck in the ocean with the Flying Dutchman, and Sandy's stuck on her own. Our cast all end up safe in the end, and we both thought this episode was better than we remembered. The episode also has a very rushed ending that brings down the episode slightly. Marcus gave this a 6 out of 10, and I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Truth or Square, a clip show without clips. This episode has Patchy trying to throw a 10-year bash for SpongeBob, and SpongeBob and his friends get trapped in the freezer in the Krusty Krab. The clips in the show have a problem because none of them are funny. We also have a slew of celebrity cameos. The only one I knew was Robin Williams.
I know this place. This is where careers come to die!
This episode is an hour long, and half of it was revolving around Patchy and his creepy antics. It's not very funny, and when the parody of animation styles appear, it's painfully obvious how cheaply they were done. I mean, a parody of a 50s ad animated in Flash does not look good. We both gave this episode a 2 out of 10. So King Neptune is 5,000 years old, and he's having a party at the Krusty Krab, and he's sad that his son isn't there. SpongeBob tries to help, so he and Patrick release Trine from his imprisonment, and Trine then ditches SpongeBob and Patrick before trapping his parents and destroying the town. SpongeBob and Patrick release Neptune, then Trine and Neptune make up and go home. This episode has no comedy and tries to tug at the heartstrings by having a story about a parent who's too stubborn to accept his child's way of life. Like every story involving a parent that just won't listen to his child. Neon did enjoy the story enough, though I found nothing here, not even something horrible. I gave this episode a 4 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 5.5 out of 10.
You know, doing an environmental episode can be really hard. SpongeBob's Last Stand tried to make a story about saving jellyfish fields, and halfway through, the episode turns into Plankton hijacking the story, and makes it a Save the Krusty Krab episode. I do like the music in this episode, and I like where the moral was trying to go. However, they botched the episode by shoving Plankton into the plot unnecessarily. Marcus didn't enjoy the episode very much, stating that Atlantis Squarepants was better, and gave this episode a 2 out of 10.
It really did suck!
And I gave this episode a 3 out of 10.
The Legend of Bikini Bottom series was one of the more interesting rating traps. For one, if done well, horror junkies would be all over them, though these 6 episodes were less than stellar. All the episodes have an idea that could be interesting. The Curse of the Hex and Sponge Cano were probably the best examples, as they did have interesting ideas that mostly worked. This series of episodes had a major problem, where the stories were either uninteresting or very boring. Luckily, Squidward is a fantastic character every time he appears. Neon wanted to point out that Mr. Krabs actually cared about his employees for once. I gave this series a 3.5 out of 10, and Neon gave this series a 5 out of 10.
Mr. Krabs sends the Krabby Patty recipe to his safe and then has to send SpongeBob to retrieve it. So SpongeBob and Patrick board a train with a key to the safe, and SpongeBob loses the key. We have a few suspects that didn't do it before they find the key. The first half of this episode, before they lose the key, is pretty good, while the second half falls flat on its face. A few of the jokes were funny, like Patrick trying to stop the train. The twist is nonsensical and stupid, only for the episode to end with nothing changing. This was a waste of an episode. Also, Marcus really enjoyed the setting. Changing things up can be advantageous to an episode, just not here. Marcus gave the episode a 3 out of 10, and I gave it a 4 out of 10.
Frozen Face Off is an episode revolving around a race to distract our main cast so Plankton can try to steal the Krabby Patty secret recipe. Our main cast also runs into a stop-motion puppet monster who wants to eat them. This was an average episode. Nothing too bad, nothing that great. Most of the jokes aren't that great, and the twist of the episode is obvious. Half the time something happens in a special episode, it's a scheme to steal the Krabby Patty formula. I gave this episode a 5 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 6 out of 10.
Everyone takes a vacation. Rub it in, why don't you? So everyone gets a vacation that takes them all over the place. SpongeBob's family goes to a water park, Sandy goes to the moon, and Krabs goes to a mint. Plankton gets on a yacht, and Patrick stays home. These episodes have a tired premise, and nothing really happens in them. There's few, if any, jokes that are worthwhile in this series. Some of these could have been creative, but they all lacked anything fun. Squidward had a good line in Patrick's episode, which is the only thing that Marcus found redeeming in that episode. Marcus gave this series a 3.5 out of 10, and I gave it a 3.6 out of 10.
Schoolfuls follows SpongeBob meeting new pirate ghosts and helping them fix their ship before the Flying Dutchman finds them, and almost everyone ends up in an alternate dimension where you're tortured for all eternity. This episode has great atmosphere, a decent song, and the new characters are all written well. The animation is quite well done, and the jokes are also very clever. I gave this episode a 7 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 7.5 out of 10. It's a SpongeBob Christmas is the first of 2 stop-motion specials animated by Screen Novelties. Plankton tries to make everyone into a jerk so he can get the Krabby Patty formula, and unlike most of the specials, this one feels genuine and not out of place. SpongeBob ends up unknowingly turning everyone into a jerk and has to get a cure from Sandy. The cure happens to be a song, and after everyone is saved, Santa shows up telling everyone that the town was too naughty and SpongeBob is the worst. We really like this episode. The animation is nice and fluid, the models they use are nicely detailed, and the music in this episode is perfect for Christmas. We gave this episode a 9 out of 10.
SpongeBob and Squidward start a band. Mr. Krabs acts as their manager, and Patrick is their roadie. They have a rivalry between another band manager, and our cast goes from gig to gig, playing low-end places before jacking a concert from another band, and getting run into the desert where they play one last great song to the backdrop of a meteor shower. This episode is a heartwarming story with great animation, good jokes, and amazing music. The last song, Never Give Up, is one of SpongeBob's best songs, especially after the first movie. We also have a few jokes with Plankton that don't get in the way of the main plot. Marcus gave this episode an 8.5 out of 10, and I gave this episode a 9 out of 10. So this highly volatile purple goo starts bubbling up from Goo Lagoon, and while Sandy's trying to save the town, Plankton tries to control the goo and use it to obtain the Krabby Patty formula. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy try to save the town from being messy and ultimately fail. Plankton also explodes. This episode has okay animation and an okay story. It isn't too special as not much happens, and the episode could probably be cut down to a standard 11-minute episode. But there isn't anything wrong with it. We both gave this episode a 6 out of 10.
SpongeBob gets fired and spends half the episode moping and half the episode trying to get a new job. Nothing else happens other than everyone SpongeBob tries to work for fighting over him before SpongeBob returns to the Krusty Krab. This episode isn't funny, original, or interesting. For some odd reason, they decided to turn a 2-minute plot into a 20-minute episode. Because of that, this episode is loaded with filler. Now, there's 2 types of filler. This one is so bad I had to put filler in the video. This episode can bite me. 2 out of 10. Also, Neon gave it a 3.5 out of 10. So, SpongeBob changes his pants again. He changes his pants again. Pants. Again. At least in this episode, everyone treats SpongeBob like he's supposed to be a mature adult, and the way they get out of the situation is well done. It's nice to see that all of SpongeBob's friends don't turn on him, and Mr. Krabs also seems nicer than normal. Not much else really happens in this episode. Some of the jokes can be funny and the design looks nice. I gave this episode a 5.5 out of 10, and Neon gave this episode a 6 out of 10.
This episode is loaded with filler, and isn't bad because of it. Mr. Krabs sells the Krabby Patty recipe to make a TV dinner Krabby Patty. Patrick becomes the face of the product, and his and SpongeBob's friendship becomes strained. SpongeBob also works in a Krusty Krab museum where frozen Krabby Patties are being sold. When Patrick finally quits, everything returns to normal. This episode has clever jokes, nice animation, and a good story. It's also nice to see how SpongeBob saves the day by being a good cook and friend. This episode was all around just a good episode. Marcus gave it an 8 out of 10, and I gave this episode a 7 out of 10.
So, in this episode, a weird green light appears from an underwater volcano and transforms the citizens of Bikini Bottom into actual fish. And Sandy is tasked to keep everyone alive until they transform back to normal at the end of the episode. So this episode is decent. Nothing amazing happens, but this episode does have an interesting story idea. It's kind of average and not very funny, just interesting. We both gave this episode a 5 out of 10.
The Legend of Bikini Bottom is the second stop-motion episode of SpongeBob. If you want to see Marcus talk about this episode, you can check it out on the first review he made on this channel. So SpongeBob and Patrick go out into town on Halloween night to have some fun. Ended up ticking off the Flying Dutchman for having fun and not being terrified by everything. We also get an awesome animated song sequence before the end of the episode, and get to look into SpongeBob's mind, which is terrifying. This is a well-made episode. I know Marcus likes the episode more than the Christmas one, simply because of the quality of the animation. It also has a good story, and some of the jokes are just priceless. Marcus gave this episode a 9 out of 10, and I gave it an 8.5 out of 10.
And that was 33 episodes of Spongebob Squarepants. Now, while making this video, at least one or more specials came out, and I wrote this video over the course of like 3 or 4 days, so I don't care.
SpongeBob is 20 years old today. Me and Marcus both enjoyed this show as kids and still do today. Even though SpongeBob has had a rough couple of years, he managed to come back strong.
The only thing that sucks about the 20-year anniversary is that Steven Hillenburg sadly passed away before this milestone. He was, if not is, the most important creator of our childhood.
Thank you all for watching.